hotel cleaner answered the phone in Italian in front of a millionaire. The next day, he sent her a letter. She was just a hotel maid invisible to the world until one unexpected phone call in flawless Italian caught the attention of the billionaire who owned the entire building. The next day, she wasn't mopping floors. She was being summoned to his office. No warning. No explanation. What did he see in her that no one else ever noticed? And why couldn't he look away? This isn't just a Cinderella story. It's a raw, powerful tale of hidden brilliance, bold chances, and a connection that defied every rule. Stay tuned, because what began with a whisper turned into a storm neither of them saw coming. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The alarm went off at 4:45 a.m., cutting through the stillness of Maya Alvarez's studio apartment like a blade. She blinked at the ceiling, the plaster-chipped paint curled at the corners and shadows dancing across the walls from the flickering street lamp outside. Another day, another shift. She pulled herself from the warmth of her blanket and stepped onto the cold tile floor, where a small electric heater hummed ineffectively in the corner. The Bronx was quiet this early, but Maya's thoughts were already racing. The subway ride was long, often unreliable, but she had trained her body to move through it like muscle memory. By 6:15 a.m., she was already in her gray housekeeping uniform, tying her dark hair into a low bun in the staff locker room of the Bell Ridge Grand Hotel. Nestled in Manhattan's Upper West Side, the Bell Ridge was the kind of place where guests never saw the people who cleaned up after them. And for a while, Maya had been fine with that. Invisibility meant safety. It meant no one asked questions she didn't want to answer. But Maya Alvarez was never meant to be invisible. She had once stood on stages presenting academic research in front of international scholars at Hunter College. She had been offered a partial scholarship to pursue a master's in applied linguistics, even had dreams of working in diplomacy, building bridges with words. Fluent in Spanish, French, English, and now, after years of self-study, Italian. It was her grandfather's native tongue, a language she clung to after he passed away, like a tether to everything warm and wise he'd ever told her. But dreams don't always pay rent. Her mother's cancer diagnosis had wiped out their savings in less than 6 months. After the funeral, Maya was left with 2 options: sink in debt or find the first job that would keep the lights on. So she chose work. At 28, she'd been cleaning hotel rooms for nearly 4 years, and yet every evening, without fail, she took the train downtown to the Brooklyn Public Library, sat at the same computer, and practiced grammar drills in Italian. Language was still her oxygen, even if no one around her seemed to notice. Until one Tuesday. That morning, Maya had been assigned to clean the executive floor. Plush hallways, gold-accented suites, and doors that only opened for guests, whose last names trended on Forbes. She was meticulous, discreet, and quick everything a luxury hotel wanted in staff that remained in the background. During her break, Maya slipped into the back courtyard. It was small and enclosed a pocket of quiet in the middle of Manhattan's rush. She warmed up the last of her arroz con pollo and scrolled through her phone. A new message blinked across the screen. "You passed," it read. "Your Italian certification is official. Call me." Her heart skipped. With shaking fingers, she dialed her language mentor, a retired linguist named Lorenzo, who lived in Florence. When he answered, Maya couldn't help herself. In flawless Italian, her words tumbled out. Did I really pass? I thought I'd blown the reading section. Past Maya, you excelled? He laughed. Your scores were higher than many native speakers. She covered her mouth, eyes stinging with tears. All the early mornings, all the late nights. She had done it. She was still laughing when the courtyard door creaked open. A man stood there, his presence so composed it seemed to still the air. Sharp navy coat, dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, and a gaze that carried weight even without words. Maya froze. Everyone on staff knew who he was. Julian Hart, CEO of Heartstone International, owner of the Belridge Grand and over 20 hotels across 5 countries. He was rarely seen, even more rarely heard. A myth dressed in Armani. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said. His voice calm, eyes narrowing slightly. Were you speaking Italian? Maya's heart thundered. She stood too fast, nearly dropping her phone. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. I was on break. It's quite all right, he interrupted gently. Where did you learn it? I studied languages in college, she said, her eyes darting away. I've continued learning. On my own time. There was a pause. Maya braced for a reprimand. Instead, he nodded once. What's your name? Maya. Maya Alvarez. He repeated it softly. Maya. Then just as suddenly he turned and walked away. She stood frozen for a moment, unsure if it had really happened. By the time she returned to her cart, she had convinced herself it had meant nothing. But the next morning, everything changed. Her supervisor called her aside, visibly rattled. You're being reassigned. HR wants to see you immediately. Maya blinked. Am I in trouble? No. At least, I don't think so. Nervous and confused, she made her way to the administrative offices, a place she had never been filled with polished floors and soft voices. The HR director, a composed woman named Ms. Everett, motioned her to sit. We received a direct request from Mr. Hart, she said. Effective today, you'll be moving into a new role. Maya's throat went dry. What role? Cultural Liaison Associate. Ms. Everett replied, almost as if she expected Maya to laugh. It's a new position. You'll work with our international guests, particularly those with limited English proficiency, helping with interpretation coordination and high-level hospitality. Maya stared at her. Is this real? Ms. Everett smiled. It's very real. You'll receive a new salary, triple your current wages, and Mr. Hart would like to meet with you this afternoon. As Maya left the office, her legs trembling, she passed the hallway she used to mop each morning. But today, something had shifted. Not just her title or her uniform, but something in the air around her. The chandeliers sparkled brighter. The marble beneath her feet felt less cold. For the first time in a very long time, she felt like she wasn't just walking through someone else's world. She was stepping into her own. If you're curious to see what happens when Maya walks into Julian Hart's office and how her world begins to transform in ways she never imagined, don't forget to share, and subscribe. The next chapter is full of twists, challenges, and inspiration you won't want to miss. Maya stood in front of the full-length mirror in the staff lounge, barely recognizing her reflection. Gone was the gray housekeeping uniform she had worn for years. In its place was a navy blue blouse tucked into a tailored skirt, her name now embroidered on a polished badge that read, Maya Alvarez, Cultural Liaison Associate. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her collar. She had never owned anything this elegant before, and she certainly had never worn clothes that felt like they belonged to a life she'd only ever observed from afar. When she stepped out of the lounge, she felt eyes on her not unkind, but curious. A few colleagues offered polite nods. Others simply stared. To many of them, Maya had been part of the background, someone who pushed a cart, offered a quiet good morning, and disappeared before anyone really noticed. But today, she walked through the corridors of the Belridge Grand like someone newly visible. Not because she wanted attention, but because invisibility was no longer an option. She arrived at the elevator bank reserved for senior executives and swiped the temporary access card given to her by HR. It beeped once, and the doors opened with a soft chime. Her heart thudded as the elevator rose. With every floor, she passed, a different version of her life flashed in her mind, the missed opportunities, the silent sacrifices, the nights she cried quietly on the subway home. And now here she was, heading to the top floor to meet with the man who had somehow seen through the fog of her circumstances. When the elevator doors opened, a receptionist greeted her with a polite smile and offered her water. Maya barely managed a nod. Moments later, Julian Hart appeared walking toward her with the same quiet command she remembered from the courtyard. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, offering his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for everything," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He led her into a private office overlooking the skyline. The windows stretched floor to ceiling, casting the room in soft afternoon light. There were no distractions, no assistants bustling in, no conference calls, just him and her, seated in sleek leather chairs, with 2 cups of coffee between them. "I'll get right to it," Julian said. "When I heard you speaking Italian, it caught me off guard. Not because it was unusual, this is New York after all, but because of the way you spoke. Confident, fluid, like you'd lived in the language." Maya said nothing, unsure whether to explain or just listen. "I've spent years designing hospitality experiences for international guests," he continued. "But I realized I've been blind to something crucial. Talent doesn't always walk through the front door in a suit. Sometimes it's already here, scrubbing floors or working in silence, and we miss it." She met his eyes for the first time. There was no arrogance in them, just focus, and maybe even a hint of humility. "I created this position for you," he said plainly. "It didn't exist before. I wanted someone who could help us really connect with our global clients. But more than that, I wanted someone who understood people. You didn't just learn Italian for a career. You learned it for love for family. That kind of motivation doesn't come from ambition alone. It comes from something deeper." Maya was stunned. She had imagined this meeting a dozen different ways. None of them had included genuine admiration. "I don't have formal experience," she said quietly. "I've never worked in a corporate setting. I don't know how these meetings go. I've only ever read about them." Julian smiled. Experience can be taught. But heart? That's rare. "This afternoon, we're hosting a lunch for a group of Italian investors. They're considering funding our new Milan property. I want you in the room. Not to impress them with credentials. Just be yourself." Maya hesitated. "And if I fail?" "Then we learn," he replied. "But I don't think you will." A few hours later, she stood outside the Belridge's Rosewood Room, a private dining area with a panoramic view of Central Park. Inside, crystal glasses sparkled under soft lighting, and the air buzzed with polished small talk. The investors arrived promptly, 5 men in elegant suits, accompanied by a translator who looked mildly uncomfortable. Maya stepped in beside Julian, introducing herself in Italian. Her tone was warm, deliberate, effortless. The room shifted. Shoulders relaxed. Smiles formed. She didn't just translate, she humanized. She interpreted not only words, but intentions, catching cultural subtleties that kept the atmosphere open and engaged. At one point, when a joke about American coffee nearly fell flat, Maya stepped in with a playful response that made everyone laugh. Julian watched impressed as she navigated the interaction with grace. Later, during a brief pause, one of the senior investors leaned over to Julian and said, "She's the reason we'll sign. You found someone who makes us feel understood." The lunch concluded with handshakes and enthusiasm. As the guests filed out, Julian turned to Maya, his voice low and sincere. "You did more than translate today. You built trust. That's the currency that really matters." Maya felt something shift in her chest, not pride exactly, but something even stronger belonging. She had been given an opportunity, yes, but what mattered most was that she had earned it. As she walked through the lobby later that evening, she no longer looked down at the marble floors she used to mop. She walked across them as if they belonged to her too, not in ownership, but in presence. Something had begun, and Maya could feel it in her bones. This was not a detour. This was the road she was always meant to walk. 3 weeks passed in a blur of new routines and growing responsibility. Maya Alvarez had moved beyond the initial awe of her new title and into something sturdier ownership. She arrived earlier than required, stayed later than expected, and approached every task with the same quiet determination that had carried her through years of unnoticed labor. But now, finally, her work was seen. And more importantly, it was heard. Julian Hart had begun calling on her more frequently, not just for translation, but for insight. After the Italian investors' meeting, he invited her to sit in on planning sessions, asked her opinion on presentation drafts, and even sent her reports for feedback before finalizing proposals. At first, she hesitated to offer, too much afraid of overstepping, of saying something naive, but Julian welcomed her perspective every time. "What would a guest from Rome think about this menu description?" he asked during one team meeting. Maya had leaned forward, careful but honest. "It's technically correct, but it's missing the warmth. Italian dining culture is about more than food. It's family, memory, emotion. The language here feels sterile." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Fix it." In the weeks that followed, more moments like that emerged. Maya offered input on guest experiences, suggested cultural improvements to the concierge system, and even helped design personalized welcome packages for high-profile clients from Europe. Her title was still Cultural Liaison Associate, but the truth was she was becoming a strategic partner, someone Julian trusted in rooms she never imagined entering. Their working dynamic was built on mutual respect. Julian remained composed, methodical, but there were glimpses of something else, subtle signs that this was more than professional curiosity. He listened with intent, asked about her background without prying, and remembered small details: her favorite poet, her grandfather's name, the fact that she always carried a red notebook for thoughts she never said aloud. One evening, after a particularly intense strategy session, Julian offered her a ride home. She hesitated, still wary of how it might appear, but accepted when he insisted. It was late and pouring rain. They sat in the back seat of a black SUV, the city lights flickering across the windows. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but charged. Maya stared out at the traffic, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. "You've been quiet," Julian said, glancing her way. She smiled faintly. "I'm still figuring out how to exist in this version of my life." "It suits you," he said. "But I understand the dissonance." "Do you?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. He nodded. More than you know. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. But something shifted in that moment. A thread of understanding pulled taut between them, still professional, but stretching gently towards something more personal. The following week, Maya was asked to assist in coordinating a major hospitality conference hosted at the Bell Ridge. Over 200 guests from various countries were attending, and the stakes were high. Julian entrusted her with overseeing the international delegation experience from language logistics to cultural sensitivities. On the first day of the conference, as Maya circulated between guests and staff, she noticed a young woman from the Turkish delegation struggling to communicate with a staff member. Maya stepped in, offered assistance in Turkish, one of the languages she had only recently begun studying. And though her words were slow and simple, they were met with deep appreciation. Later that same day, a senior executive from another hotel chain approached her privately. "You're not just the interpreter, are you?" he said, smiling. "You're the reason this whole thing feels so smooth." Maya thanked him politely, but inside, the words planted something deep proof that her presence mattered far beyond translation. She wasn't just filling a role, she was redefining what it meant. That night, Julian asked her to join him for a quick debrief in one of the quiet lounges after guests had cleared out. The room was dimly lit, and outside the windows, the city was humming in its usual restless rhythm. "I heard what you did with the Turkish delegate," he said. Maya shook her head modestly. "It was just a simple greeting." "Exactly," he said. "And that's why it meant something." He looked at her, then not just with admiration, but with something gentler. "You see, people," he added, "that's what sets you apart. It's not just language, it's care." Maya wasn't sure how to respond. Compliments like that still felt like foreign currency, valuable but unfamiliar. "There's something I want to ask you," Julian continued. "Something outside of work." She braced herself. "I have a private dinner next week with a potential investor from Florence. No assistance, no press. I'd like you to be there, not just to translate, but to help me read the room. These dinners are as much about what's said as what isn't." Maya hesitated, the line between professional and personal now faint and shimmering. But then she nodded. "I'd be honored." As the night grew later, Maya returned to her apartment. In the Bronx, climbed the narrow staircase and sat quietly by her window. She thought about everything that had happened in just a few weeks. The shifts, the acceleration, the way her voice was no longer just heard, but counted. She was no longer the woman who waited in silence for someone to notice. She was being asked to speak, to advise, to lead. Still, a question lingered. Could she trust this momentum? Was this real, or just a brief moment of light before fading back into shadows? She didn't know the answer. But she did know this: she would no longer shrink herself to fit expectations that never made space for her. She had earned this. She was building this. One decision, one room, one voice at a time. And Julian Hart, he was no longer just a figure at the top of the hotel empire. He was becoming something else entirely: a mirror, a test, a man whose belief in her might be the most dangerous gift she'd ever been given. The rooftop garden wasn't listed on any Belridge Grand brochure. It wasn't part of the official tour, nor did it feature in the luxury photo spreads sent to investors. It existed quietly, an oasis of green on the 21st floor, hidden behind a nondescript service stairwell and a keycard-locked glass door. That night, it was lit only by a string of warm cafe lights that swayed gently in the evening breeze. And it was there that Julian had asked Maya to meet him, not for work, but for something else. When she stepped onto the rooftop, Maya paused. The city stretched out before her, lights flickering like distant stars. It was quieter than she expected, softer. She spotted Julian near the far railing, dressed more casually than usual. No suit, no tie, just a dark sweater and slacks. He looked younger like this, less curated. "You found it," he said with a small smile, gesturing toward the bench beside him. "I wasn't sure I should." Maya replied, her voice honest. "You're here, that's enough." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of New York below them filling the space between words. It wasn't awkward. In fact, it was the most natural silence Maya had felt in weeks. Julian handed her a paper cup of tea chamomile, her favorite. "I come here when the world feels too loud," he said. "No emails, no calls, just this." Maya wrapped her hands around the cup and nodded. "I didn't expect this side of you." He glanced at her. "Most people don't. I don't usually show it." "Why me?" she asked before she could stop herself. Julian was quiet for a moment, then turned toward her. "Because I see myself in you. Or maybe who I used to be." She frowned slightly. "You were never invisible." "I was a janitor's son in a city that didn't care," he replied. "I scrubbed the floors of a hotel, not unlike this one, while watching suits walk past me as if I were part of the furniture. No one saw me until one day someone did. They offered a door I didn't know I could knock on." Maya's heart ached. It was the first time he'd ever spoken of his past in such detail. "I know what it means to be overlooked," he continued. "That's why I don't let it happen when I can help it." Maya looked out over the skyline. "Do you ever wonder how much of who we become is because of who we're told we aren't?" Julian smiled, slow and thoughtful. "All the time." As the breeze picked up, Maya pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. She wasn't used to being invited into spaces like this, not physical spaces, but emotional ones. Vulnerability wasn't a language she used often, but here with Julian it felt almost safe. He turned to her again, his expression more serious now. "There's something I've been struggling with," he admitted. "Something personal." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You struggling?" Julian chuckled. "Believe it or not." "What is it?" He hesitated. "You." The word hung in the air, charged with meaning. Maya's breath caught. "I mean," he clarified, quickly, not in a bad way. "Just what we've built together has grown into something I didn't expect. And I don't want to jeopardize what you've achieved. Your rise has been yours on merit. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't care for you in a way that goes beyond work." Maya looked down at her hands. She had felt it too. The late-night conversations, the shared silences, the small glances they had all been pointing to this moment. And yet she feared what it could cost her. Reputation, credibility, the delicate balance she had worked so hard to build. "I've worked my whole life to be taken seriously," she whispered. "If people find out, they'll say I didn't earn it, that you favored me." Julian reached out but didn't touch her. He just waited. "I know," he said. "And if that means you walk away from this us, I'll understand. But I won't pretend I don't feel it." Maya's throat tightened. Her entire life had been about control, about caution. And here was a man offering her something raw, unscripted, and impossibly risky. "What do you see when you look at me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I see someone I admire," he answered. "Not for what you do, but for who you are when no one's watching." The air between them shifted. Not heated, not urgent, just honest. The kind of truth that doesn't demand anything in return. After a long silence, Maya said softly, I'm not walking away. Julian nodded slowly, a quiet relief settling in his expression. I'm glad. The next few days passed like a strange dream. Maya kept her focus sharp at work, navigating meetings, handling high-stakes conversations with poise. But when she and Julian crossed paths, now something had changed. Their connection wasn't spoken aloud, but it pulsed quietly beneath everything, an unacknowledged rhythm in how they moved, how they looked at each other just a beat longer than necessary. There were whispers, of course. Colleagues noticing the closeness, the after-hours meetings. Maya overheard two senior staff members speculating in the elevator one morning. She's not just translating anymore. Must be nice to have that kind of access. The word stung. Not because they were cruel, but because they were easy. It would be easy for others to reduce everything she had accomplished to proximity. To assume power had chosen her, rather than acknowledging that she had earned every inch of it. That evening, Julian addressed it without being asked. I know what people are saying, he said in his office. And if you want me to pull back, create distance. No, Maya interrupted. I don't run from things just because they're complicated. Julian smiled. Neither do I. For the first time in her life, Maya stood at the intersection of vulnerability and power. She wasn't naive. She knew how fragile everything could be. But she also knew that what they were building both professionally and personally was rooted in something rare, mutual respect, authenticity, and the kind of quiet courage that doesn't need to be declared to be real. And as she left his office that night, passing through the golden-lit halls of a place she used to clean in silence, Maya Alvarez no longer questioned whether she belonged. She knew. The marble floors of the Belridge Grand had once echoed with the sound of Maya Alvarez's cleaning cart. Her footsteps muffled her presence unacknowledged. Now those same floors carried the deliberate click of her heels as she moved through the executive corridor with purpose, head held high. Her new nameplate had just been installed outside the boardroom. Maya Alvarez, Director of Global Relations. The weight of it wasn't in the title, but in everything it took to arrive here. Her days had become a swirl of strategy meetings, multilingual correspondence, and high-level coordination with hotel partners across Europe and Asia. She had recently returned from Florence, where she'd led negotiations for Belridge's partnership with one of Italy's most historic hospitality families. The deal was signed under warm Tuscan skies, but the victory was far from romantic. Maya had worked through resistance, cultural tension, and backroom politics, navigating it all with sharp instinct and unshakable grace. Julian hadn't accompanied her on that trip. It was a deliberate choice. He wanted her to own it, not because she needed his support, but because he knew she didn't. And when she returned, she was greeted not with flowers or grand applause, but something far more valuable, his quiet nod of pride, a single sentence spoken as they passed in the hallway. You did it your way. In the months that followed, Maya's name began to circulate beyond the walls of the Belridge. Industry blogs picked up the story. From housekeeping to the C-suite, the rise of Maya Alvarez. Some articles painted it like a fairy tale. Others tried to stir drama about her relationship with Julian, hinting that her success was too fast, too convenient. Maya didn't answer the noise. She let her work speak. She knew that speculation was the cost of visibility, but the truth was written in numbers, in impact, in the quiet gratitude of team members she had uplifted along the way. One crisp fall afternoon, Maya stood in front of a group of young interns, part of a new mentorship program she had helped establish. They were first-generation students, many from backgrounds like hers. Some shy, some bold, all watching her, with the kind of curiosity she used to carry when she rode the subway past towering buildings, wondering if she'd ever belong inside them. You don't have to come from privilege to take up space, she told them. You just need to hold on to who you are long enough for the right door to open. And when it does, don't knock. Walk through it like you've always known you should be there. One of the interns, a quiet girl named Sophia, approached her afterward. Did you ever feel like giving up? Maya smiled gently. Almost every day. But someone believed in me at just the right moment. And eventually I learned to believe in myself. Later that week, she and Julian flew to Amsterdam for the grand opening of the newest Belridge Hotel, an ambitious expansion she had personally helped bring to life. As they arrived at the venue, cameras flashed. Industry leaders and reporters buzzed around them, but Julian kept his hand respectfully at her back, close but not possessive. In his opening remarks, he didn't start with numbers or investor praise. Instead, he spoke about Maya. We're standing in a building that represents vision, he said. Not mine, but hers. Maya Alvarez is the reason this hotel exists. Her insight, her leadership, and her empathy shaped this project. She is not a symbol of charity or chance. She is the future of this company. Maya listened, her throat tight. He had said it publicly without needing to. And in that moment, the whispers faded. The doubts dissolved. That night, after the event, they stood on the balcony of their suite, overlooking the canals. A light drizzle fell, the city glowing in golden hues beneath them. Julian poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. About the first time I picked up a mop in the Belridge, about how small I felt, and about how I don't feel that way anymore. Julian leaned closer. You've never been small. She smiled, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. And I think I finally believe that. In the quiet that followed, Maya thought of the many versions of herself she had carried: the student, the caregiver, the cleaner, the dreamer. She hadn't shed them. She had built on them. Each identity had shaped the foundation. She now stood on solid, strong her own. A few weeks later, Maya returned to the Bronx on her day off. She walked past the library where she used to study late into the night, through the neighborhood where every corner held a memory of struggle. As she waited for her coffee at the corner cafe, a young girl approached her, no more than 13. Do you work at that fancy hotel downtown? The girl asked shyly. I saw your picture on my cousin's feed. Maya bent down slightly, her smile warm. I help run it. The girl's eyes widened. You're famous. Not even close, Maya laughed. But I worked hard. And I didn't give up. The girl nodded, her admiration silent, but real. Maya walked away, feeling something new. Not pride, not even joy, but legacy. Proof that she had changed the narrative, not just for herself, but for anyone who dared to believe they could be more than what the world expected. And as she stepped back into the rhythm of her life, Maya Alvarez didn't wonder anymore whether she belonged in the room she entered. She had rewritten the blueprint. She was no longer the woman they overlooked. She was the one they followed. Conclusion and life reflection. The story of Maya Alvarez and Julian Hart. Maya Alvarez's journey began in silence. For years, she moved through life unnoticed, waking before sunrise, scrubbing luxury floors, and studying languages long after her shift ended. She was a hotel housekeeper with a secret dream and relentless self-discipline. No one saw her, not really, until one afternoon when a single moment of fluency in a foreign language caught the attention of someone who would change her life, not by rescuing her, but by recognizing her. Julian Hart, a billionaire hotelier with a carefully built empire, wasn't looking for inspiration that day. But when he heard Maya speaking fluent Italian with joy and precision, something shifted. He didn't see a maid. He saw a leader, a mind, a force that had simply gone uninvited for far too long. And instead of letting that moment pass, he opened a door. What followed wasn't a fairy tale, but a transformation built on hard-earned trust, courage, and mutual respect. Maya didn't rise because of romance or luck. She rose because she showed up fully with integrity, insight, and the willingness to walk into rooms she once only cleaned. Julian didn't fall for an illusion. He stood beside someone who challenged and inspired him. Together, they built something real, not just professionally, but personally. Their love wasn't the center of the story. It was the result of it, the product of honesty, growth, and seeing one another as equals. Maya's past didn't disqualify her. It gave her depth. Her pain became perspective. Her silence became strategy. And her voice, once hidden, became one of the most trusted in the Belridge legacy. The core lesson from this story is powerful. Your worth is not defined by your title, your paycheck, or the room you're standing in. It's defined by what you carry inside, the talents you nurture in quiet, the values you protect when no one is watching, and the courage you show when opportunity finally knocks. In today's fast-moving world, it's easy to overlook the people who work behind the scenes. Maya's story is a reminder to pause, to notice, and to believe that brilliance often hides in the most humble places. For anyone feeling stuck, unseen, or underestimated, know this. The road ahead isn't about who gives you permission. It's about recognizing your own potential and being ready when the moment comes. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What part of Maya's story resonated most with you? Was it her resilience, Julian's willingness to look deeper, or their evolving connection? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can reflect and be inspired too. And if this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you more powerful, heartfelt stories just like this. Your support means the world and helps us continue creating content that uplifts, empowers, and reminds us all of what's possible.